Football made simple. Become great at your craft by finding ways to make it simple for those around you. This is the Coaching 101 podcast hosted by Findaway Productions with your co-host, Daniel Chamberlain and Kenny Simpson. What's up, coaches? This is Coaching 101 podcast. I'm Daniel Chamberlain, here today with Coach Simpson of Northeast Arkansas Persuasion. How's things over there?
Going well. New year, so everybody's we're ready to get back into the weight room with our kids and ready to kind of get moving. I think, most coaches, you may start your off season in November or December, but really January, you kind of start turning your attention to, okay, last year's over. Now we got to move forward. So I think that's probably where everybody is. And then, of course, clinic season for me is really, really busy, as I'm sure it is for a lot of other guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's that awkward amount of time between the end of season, depending on how far your season goes, right? If you're in the playoffs or not. And then, what do you do with the kids? And so most places I've been, we've not made it to the playoffs. And so we have to get back in the weight room because you can't let a month go to waste. Although, a lot of those kids are leaving to go to other sports. But we just try to keep them busy. It was pretty nice to see that's exact mentality at Owasso this year was, we went to next to the last game and got put out in the semis, and still, the next week we're right back in the weight room. So
yeah, we did maxes and kind of got the weight room clean, and we got 1 week worth of trying to get them used to it. Then we bring a lot of our kids up at the semester, so a lot of our ninth graders come up, so you got to redo all that. Tomorrow we'll go back to the weight room and bring the ninth graders in and go through expectations and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, but I don't know if every team. Like Oklahoma, the OSSAA doesn't allow eighth graders to participate in spring ball, but I think they can participate in weight room. So it's as long as their hour aligns, which I know most of the time they don't, right? I'm sure your junior high is first or fourth hour or something weird. But maybe you can get them transitioned, which is another reason New Year, right? Most people can switch that schedule at the end of the semester and get everybody in there kind of doing the same thing. So that's good. Yeah, we're looking forward to clinic. This comes out next Sunday, so we'll actually be starting the AFCA clinic that day, I guess it's not really a clinic, but we're going to call it one anyway. So, man, I'm pumped to be going up there and just talking to some guys. I know that you've reached out to some coaches. I've reached out to a few to see if we can get anybody to come talk with us. So hopefully we're getting some good content there at the convention. But all right, Coach. Well, we'll get started real quick. I know we're a little bit on a time crunch today. So why don't you share some ways that we can simplify coaching for ourselves, our staff, and our players?
Coaching 101 podcast is sponsored by Findaway Productions. Findaway Productions also sponsors fbcoachsimpson.com for all your coaching needs, with over 30 coaching materials, books, as well as 50 PowerPoints and videos and smaller materials, and the free magazine headsets. Findaway Productions also sponsors offensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things offense, and defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things defense.
This episode is brought to you by Athletic Speed and Movement. At athleticspeedmovement.com, we've taken Del Basquet's 45 years of speed and movement training and put it all in one place just for you. You can get the same training that NFL players have been getting for years, collegiate players have been getting for years, and now high schools across the nation are paying thousands of dollars to bring Del in to install his system, but we've got it online for you. It's time to help your team become faster, not just in the 40, not just their sprint speed, but between the tackles and their cuts while they're chasing down the quarterback. It's time for you to help them become faster everywhere. Jump over to athleticspeedmovement.com. There's an orange button there. Just click it. It says, get the keys to playing faster. You'll get the 3 core movement video from Dell. He's explaining the science behind it, all for just the price of your email. Check it out, athleticspeedmovement.com. Awesome, Coach. I know you had one more thing that you're trying to pitch nowadays, so why don't you tell us about your invention?
Yeah, I'm one of those guys that just never thought I would be an inventor. I'm not that kind of guy, but I've got the coach's cap. So basically the way this came about was I forget my whistle all the time at practice, but I had to get some skin cut off. So I've gotten big into wearing boonie caps and protecting yourself as a coach. So I thought, well, how can we combine the whistle with the hat? And so basically we got a Fox 40 whistle, patented it, which is my first ever patent. It's patent pending, which means I've got to pay a lot more money to get it officially done, but it's there where it's protected. But basically I've got a whistle, a Fox 40 whistle attached to the bottom of a boonie cap. They're available over at coachescap.com. And I'm learning quickly that I'm not made for shipping and doing all this stuff. So we only ordered gray because we figured gray, every team could bring it in if they want to put their own logo on it, go for it. Did 3 sizes. So we have normal size heads. It goes up to about 7 3/8, which is what I consider relatively normal. Then we have an extra large, which goes all the way to 7 3/4. And then we have what we call the O-line coach size, which basically is those bucket head guys. Because I knew if I'm doing this for coaches, we got to have a good whistle, we got to have a good hat, and we got to have a huge area that we can cover. So I think we
Yeah.
ordered about 2,000. My anticipation is I hope they'll sell. I don't know. I think that this is a good invention for coaches. Protect yourself and maybe don't forget your whistle.
Hey, I hope they sell good, and it's not the next Derek Smith. Buy a bunch of cups, put your logo on it, and then you give them away for the next 10 years. So
Correct. I didn't know
we'll
where
have to
that.
tag him up in this episode and let him know that we were thinking about him when trying to sell this hat. Well, man, that's awesome. You know what? The skin prevention or the skin keeping the sun off of you is something that younger coaches don't think of. It's just a sunburn to us. I hate that you had to go through that and have something cut out, a cancer or whatever. But it's great that you're spreading the message, and not only like, hey, protect yourself, but here's a way to protect yourself. I think it's big time because a lot of people just they don't understand, right? What do they say? Like an ounce of cure is worth a pound, or excuse me, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So just wear a hat, man. Just keep the sun off your skin as much as possible. I see you in your long sleeves, although I know that's because you're cold in the summer, right?
Yeah.
That's really what it
No,
is.
I've gotten to where I've adjusted, but yes, I'm long sleeves, big hat. It doesn't matter what time of year. That's what I'm wearing. If it's
There
winter,
you go.
still got a hat on. Just try to take care of myself.
There we go. All right, man. Let's jump into some questions here. So we've talked a little bit of culture stuff. We've had on DJ come on and talked, really setting up your culture and answering the questions and solving your problems. We've had some guys come on talk a little bit of X's and O's, but today we want to kind of hone back in, give guys that are really working that playbook early in the year kind of an understanding, a plan of attack, if you will. And so that's what we're talking about today. Is just we want to talk about organizing your rushing attack to make you successful in the run game, and you being an RPO guy and I would say you even brought some past concepts to the wing tee, which is great. I think a strong run game helps set all those up. So the first question here, just what goes into a rushing attack? What am I looking to do?
Yeah, you got to kind of figure out what identity you want on offense first. You can win football games being pass heavy or run heavy. So you got to kind of like figure out what that looks like for you and your team. And obviously I have my thoughts on what needs to happen, but every coach needs to sit down and say, okay, are we gonna like be heavy focused in the passing game? If that is the case, then we need to shrink our run game. And maybe I just need to go with a couple concepts and try to dress those up. So a lot of spread teams, if you watch them, they run either like inside zone, outside zone, or they run counter power. Like that's basically what you see a lot of the pass heavy type teams, with spread heavy type teams will run is either inside zone, outside zone, or power counter. Some try to do both, but you got to kind of think about you have a finite amount of time. So if you're going to run a bunch of passing concepts, then you need to shrink your running concepts.
Right.
If it's the other way around, let's say you're going to be run heavy, then I think you can get into maybe a couple more wrinkles in the run game. I don't ever suggest you put in 1,000 concepts, but you can put in a little bit more if run game is going to be more of what you do than the passing game. Of course, you got to figure out, are we going to be under center in the gun? All that stuff has to kind of come into play. So before you can even think about what runs are we going to do, you need to think about what you want your identity to look like. And that needs to match your talent, I would suggest. I've learned that if you feel you are below average talent or average talent, you better be really, really good at throwing the ball and teaching those concepts, or that's going to go sideways really quickly for you.
Right.
Where I think in the running game, you can shrink the game and keep the game closer, and try to limit opportunities. So it's just something you need to think about as a coach. And I think that takes a big precedence. I mentioned it earlier, I'm not a big fan of guys that try to run zone and gap. I think you need to probably excel in one of them and put wrinkles in that. So if you're going to run zone, outside zone, inside zone, whatever, you probably need to major in that. And you might have one little counter off of that. You might have one little ISO play that's kind of easy to put in, but you need to major in what you're doing. Because zone, the way you teach it, is expensive and it takes a lot of time. You can be successful. A lot of teams are successful running flavors of zone, but now you're starting to see guys that run zone working on, okay, we can do some pin and pull because it matches our concepts, and I believe in that. I'm a big Dolphin fan. They got crushed last week, but they run a lot of zone, a lot of pin and pull, which kind of matches what they're trying to do. I
Yeah.
think you can do that. I think if you go gap scheme, that's a whole different way to teach how you're blocking things. And so, to me, you need to pick one or the other to major in. I'm not saying you can't have both in your playbook, but what are you going to live in when you got to run the ball and pound the rock to win a game? The next thing I think you got to look at is how are you going to figure out ways to gain numbers? Like if you are under center running the ball, what are you going to do when they put 9 guys in the box? Like how are you going to alleviate that pressure? Or if you're a spread guy, how are you going to get a light enough box to run it? Or when the box is not light, what's your progression there? I think when you're thinking run game, you always have to think numbers. It makes no sense. I see all the time where you're running a guy into a box where there's an unaccounted for player. That's not good coaching. Like you are asking a kid to make a play because you're not good enough to create the advantage for them by getting the numbers correctly. So that's the next thing I would say you need to think about when you're planning your running game is what am I going to do in these extremely heavy boxes? And there's options. You can run quarterback run, which a lot of times will gain a blocker. We'll talk about
Right.
some other ones here later on with play action, all that kind of stuff. But what are you going to do when they load the box? Are you going to have the ability to run unbalanced sets to trick the defense a little bit? Can you run motions and shifts and all that kind of stuff to kind of get the numbers right? Like I mentioned, can you go empty and run the quarterback? But what are you going to do in those situations? I think those are the three major things: is what's your identity going to be? Are you going to be zone or gap? And then what are you going to do worst case scenario when everyone in the stadium knows you got to run it and you still got to run it? How are you going to get that right?
Yeah, that zone versus gap. I don't know if it's a competition or it's just like it seems like guys that and they're doing what they're supposed to. They're coaching what they know, right? But there will people that'll tell you that if you have the worst O line you've ever seen in your whole life, you better run zone, right? Because you can just count it up and go put bodies on bodies and run behind the wedge, if you will. And then there's the opposite. This is if you have the worst O line you've ever had in your entire career, you better run gap scheme because it's a lot easier to down block and build that wall and kick the one guy, and I don't have to worry about anybody else past the kick man, right? I've eliminated them. But it seems like everyone nowadays is running some version of power counter and inside zone. It's like nobody runs trap anymore, right? Or blast or whatever you want to call it back wham. I don't know. Everybody has weird names for things, but it's like trap has gone away because we don't know how to coach it maybe. And so it's always like my outside, my off tackle is a gap scheme, and then my inside is zone. So which works, right? It's a way. I like it. That's kind of how I think I organize my things in my head. So yeah, man. So we'll jump into you answer most of the questions there. Most things I was going to say about what goes in that rushing attack, just having options outside the tackle or inside run game, kind of that mid area inside the tackle, off tackle, and then outside. So having the ability to hit all of those with as few concepts as possible. So if that is you're running gap scheme and you want to run power counter trap, great. You've answered all those questions with the same scheme. We're all doing the same block down, kick out, let's go, right? We've just changed the kick man. Zone, same way. You can run inside zone, outside zone. Some people call stretch, or we can even add toss in there. You've talked about pin pull. I think it marries to both. The old truck toss, where we can just pull an old man or an old lineman and get him out there. So lots of ways to organize that. But can you answer those 4 questions? Can I run off the center, inside the tackle, off tackle, and then try to hit the perimeter? So I think that's where we should go with a rushing attack. So why do we organize it in families and series? What is the advantage there?
Yeah, I think you kind of got to think about, what do you define as a family or a series first? To me, a series is basically complementary plays that are built off of a base run. That's kind of how I think of series. I don't know how everybody else does, but that's kind of the wing T mindset where, like you mentioned, you have an inside run, outside run, you have a play action, you have whatever. Like all of that needs to look the same in the backfield. So that's when I think of a series or a family. That's kind of what I think of is that could be inside zone, and we have these complements off of it. That could be buck sweep. That could be power. We have all of these kind of complements that we're building off of the base. Before I go too far, then you think about like you're building a house. If your base is horrible, your house is going to crumble. Like nobody's going to respect play action if your base is not good. Your RPO game's not going to be great if they don't respect. So you got to make sure the base is solid, and that's the run. In my opinion, that's the run that you're building all of this stuff off of. You could think of the same thing when we get to passing game down the road, but like if you're going to run verticals is going to be what you live in, and then you can be good with your complements. Think about it that way. Like you need to be really good at the base. Your complements you have to be just okay at those. Like just be decent. But if you're horrible at the base, the run, nothing else I talk about here is going to work. So kind of as we're going through this, you need to make sure that you're living in that world from question number one. You've chosen your run, and this is what you're going to live in. And then now we can build complements. And the example I'd give is, again, I'll go back to a game I watched yesterday. The Dolphins got just thumped by the Ravens. Well, their offense
Yeah,
is
they
good.
did.
Miami runs a good offense when they have to respect the running game. We run a really good offense when you got to respect the running game. But Tua running play action pass down 30 and trying to throw a ball in a window about this big to Tyreek Hill when every one of the Ravens are dropping back to cover, it's going to get picked, and it did. But when you can make them respect the running game just enough, all of a sudden, even a great defense with a guy like Tyreek Hill is getting wide open because they're respecting the run game. And so think about
Right.
that as we kind of build on this. But so first thing I've got on here is, obviously the run's got to be good. Then I think you have to be able to make adjustments inside of the run. What are you going to do to this front, to that front? What are you going to do when this guy's getting whipped or that guy's really good? And that could be simple like outside zone to pin and pull. We can't run outside zones, so we're going to run pin and pull instead. Instead of scooping, we're going to let you block down and you wrap around the edge. Okay, that's an easy adjustment. It could be, hey, we run power, but now we're going to lock onto the end and not kick him. We're going to wrap both guys instead of a kick wrap. So it's easy adjustments in the run game. You can't have a lot of adjustments if you've got a whole bunch of runs. But if you have a couple runs that you're good at, you can have all kinds of adjustments, just little wrinkles and ways to help your linemen. So that's what I think the first thing I think about is what adjustments am I going to have in the base run to help the linemen? Okay. Then I think about RPO game or play action game, whatever you're going to kind of live in. I think you need to have both. But, if you're an under center team, you're probably not running RPOs. So what are your play actions that are kind of protecting your run that look the exact same? So you think about if I'm running outside zone, who's going to make tackles on that? And so I want to be able to attack those defenders as I build out my play action. Is it a safety coming down? Well, then I want some kind of same side vertical threat on my play action to attack that. Are they overloading and running to the play with their linebackers? Well, that's when you see like waggle and the crossers and boot, where now I'm bringing it here, the linebacker's flowing and I'm hitting right behind the linebacker in the play action game. Same thoughts in the RPO game. That's where you see a lot of those glance routes where we're running whatever it is and we're bringing a receiver into the window where the linebacker has to make a decision. Or maybe a safety's screwing down and we're going to throw a deeper RPO off of him. Or maybe they've committed more guys to the box and we're just going to throw a missile screen out there. So that's the RPO world. Obviously, it can be as exotic as you want to make it, but the RPO world and the play action world, those are your complements. And like I mentioned, I don't think you have to be just great at the RPOs if you're really good at the run, because that's going to open up the RPO game to be open. But running an RPO or play action on 3rd and 10, or like the Dolphins did down 30, probably ain't going to work. Okay. And then the second thing I think you need to do if you're building this is you need to build in motions and shifts. And can you run the ball with a different guy? Like maybe we run power and then we're going to fake the ball to the running back and run Q counter. Well, to the lineman, that's the same blocking, but to us in the backfield, we've changed up the action to give me some answers. Or maybe I'm going to run jet sweep with motion, and I'm going to run toss jet sweep from the backfield. I'm going to throw it from the backfield, but the linemen are all blocking jet. Okay. Or maybe off of that, I'm going to just run quarterback jet, just snap it to him and let him run jet. So there's a lot of ways I can dress up these run plays with motions, handing the ball to a different player, or I can give illusion. That's the third one I've got on here, is kind of that illusion type deal where now we're bringing motion just to window dress it. Then I think you also have to have the final thing on the run game is you got to have that counter or reverse, the big play action you can hit people on. We're going to run zone, 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 and either we're going to pull it out the back door on an RPO, or we're going to actually pitch it and run reverse. Or maybe we're going to run power, 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 and the quarterback's going to pull it and run counter. What can I run that goes the opposite direction to take advantage of people? That could be as simple as a true reverse, or that could be a little more exotic depending on how far you want to go. But what are you going to do to attack the defense? So just think about it. You have the base, and then you're building all these walls to protect the base. Sometimes those walls are really fun to build because they're explosive plays like play action, RPO, reverse. That's fun. Sometimes there are little things that no one thinks about, like an adjustment in your blocking scheme, or a motion we're going to run, or a formation we're going to run to get numbers right. So they can be boring things. Those are the bricks you put in the house, or they can be exciting things, the kind of the flash that you get to put on there. But a lot of times what screws coaches up is we get to the flash before we've built the foundation and put the bricks around it to protect it. So that would be what I would caution a lot of coaches is make sure your foundation's solid before you start building this other series, families, whatever you want to build.
So when I think about families and series, I kind of, and I don't know who really taught me this way or if I just invented it, but when I think families, I think ease for me in teaching. So if I'm going to teach the zone family, if I'm going to teach the gap scheme family, if I'm going to teach the Y cross family, whatever, I'm going to put it into a container if you're talking about what Joe Daniel wants to talk about, or a bucket if you're Ohio State. But I'm going to put that family so that I can teach it easily. If I'm teaching inside zone, outside zone, jet sweep, and I want it all to use the same blocking, that's a family to me. And then when I go into series, I think the way that I think of series is I'm going to be able to predict what the defense is doing because everything is going to look the same, right? So I know the inside zone and outside zone looks similar, but jet sweep really doesn't. I feel like we add some things, but that's for me to be able to teach it easy. When I get into that series, it's buck sweep, right? Everything looks like buck. And I'm going to make them commit to buck, and they're going to have to stop it. And then I'm going to hit something out the back door, or I'm going to go where they aren't because I can now determine, hey, I know how this defense is likely going to play this play because they think it's the base play, right? And so now I can take advantage. You start talking about adjustments, and I really think that's the way the football is going. I think the having 25 plays is going out the window, and people are going to get back into having 2 or 3 run plays, having 2 or 3 pass plays, and just be able to tag the dickens out of it, right? Make those adjustments because if my kids can't remember, like I've been in part of offenses, the kids couldn't remember because there was literally 15 pass concepts, right? We needed some quick game. We need a bunch of them. We need a bunch of 3-step drop, a bunch of 5-step drop. Like eventually the kids are just like, you've just got me going all over the place. But, we talked to Cameron Palmer last week or a couple weeks ago, last week, and he talks about they use 3 passing concepts and they can just tag it. So where the kids are always running mesh or they're always running Y cross, but I'm just changing one dude's route because I can see the safeties playing too tight or staying over the top too much, or this is the defense they're running this week. So it kind of gets out of that. I need a coverage 1 beater, coverage 3 beater, coverage 2 beater. I don't need that anymore. I need to be really good at my one thing, and then I can make the adjustments and tags and let the kids just go catch a football. So I think that's the way it's going. We'll see. That's kind of what I preach when I'm talking to coaches is that simplification. It means install less and be able to adjust more. So I really like what you talked about. If you're getting your butt whipped by one dude on defense, we do that. And what do? We call it bracket. We just double team a guy, right? No matter where he goes, if they're going to line up number one, who's signed with the local D1 college, we're going to put 2 guys on him and make somebody else beat us. But on offense, we have a hard time putting that into our scheme, right? Because I only know one way to teach zone blocking, and it doesn't. There's no double teams, so or there are, but they're interior, if anything, right? So the ability to inside your system be able to make that adjustment, like, look, the H-back ain't doing whatever he was doing anymore. He's helping the backside tackle with that defensive end who's committed to go play big ball, right? So we're gonna be able to make those adjustments. I think is big time. Last question here: how can we develop a ground game that sets us up for success? So we're brand new coaches or OC or whatever. How do we develop that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is a mindset. I think a lot of times you can, as a coach, you can speak things into existence. So a lot of times as a coach, here's what I mean by that. Like you go into a school that's not very successful and they're not tough, but you say we're going to be tough, and then you continue to tell these kids we're tough, and you do things where they can show some success, and you point back to that and say, see, look, we are tough, and you continue to do that. So I think a lot of times as coaches, the same thing with a running game. I think a running game is kind of, when you look at tough football teams, and I'm not saying you can't win throwing the ball or that you don't need to throw the ball to win. You do. I mean, today's football, you need to be able to throw the football to win games. That's something I'm doing a lot of research on this year because that's an area of the game we weren't great at last year, where I think if we could have been a little bit better in that area, maybe we win one more game. And so I'm not discounting throwing the ball or how important it is. But I am saying that when you look at tough football teams, you tend to think of teams that run the ball and they stop the run. And that's usually a great formula at any level of success for winning games. And I think a lot of that comes back to mindset. You can win and run the ball successfully running only zone scheme. You can, and we've seen it done at every level of football. You can win and only run gap scheme. We've seen that done at every level of football. And so I think a lot of it is just what is your mindset toward the run. And what your mindset is toward the run, the kids are going to also take that mindset on. If you say this is important and here's how we're going to do it and here's what we're going to do, they're going to kind of buy into that mindset. If it's you give it lip service, but you spend 95% of your time in practice on throwing the ball, then that's what they're going to know. And I think that's the issue with the run game sometimes as coaches. It's kind of boring to practice. And so we practice all the complementary stuff because we feel like we got to have all these complements, and then we're not good at the base thing. So kind of go back to question 2 you had there. You need to spend the time in. You need to make sure it really is important to you because ultimately that's how you're going to win championships. I mean, you think about
Right.
how you finish games. You're up one score and you got to get a first down to win it. You want to be in a situation there where you kind of know what you're going to do to run the ball. Or it could be, you've got to get a yard. I mean, how many times have you seen teams lose a game because they couldn't convert 4th and 1, or they couldn't score inside the red zone? Well, no offense
Right.
to the passing game, but that's where that mindset of running the ball is huge. And so I think that's the kind of things you have to think about is, what kind of mindset are we setting with our kids there? I think also I kind of mentioned it. You think of being physical when we run the ball. We use that word a lot with our kids. That we're going to be the most physical on the team on the field. I don't care how big they are, strong they are, or whatever. And then it takes time to actually kind of get that culture going towards. And I'm not trying to go just culture because I know scheme is important. It definitely is. But your job on scheme is all the stuff to kind of prepare it. Like what kind of run are we going to run? How are we going to adjust to it? All that stuff we answered in the earlier questions. And I think the final thing you have to do as a coach, you have to get the numbers right. Like I think that's your number one job as an offensive coordinator. And I see too many coaches kind of fail in this world. Like passing, running, whatever you want to do, your entire job is to give your kids a numbers advantage. And I think to me, the game is tilted to favor the offensive coordinator. You should always be able to run plays into a favorable box. If you're going to run the ball, Daniel kind of mentioned it. There's 3 places you can attack in the running game. You need to be able to attack all 3 of those in every formation that you have. And that allows you to attack in those areas. And that would also work in the passing game. Like the passing game's easy because a parent in the stands can look out there and say, well, they got 3 dudes and 2 guys are covering. That's why so many coaches kind of default back into that world because it's easy to see. How do you do it in the running game? How are you manipulating the front to get what you want, to create the angles that you want, to get the blocking that you want? And I think that's where a lot of coaches struggle, honestly, in coaching. I think one of the most misunderstood positions in all of sports is the offensive line. And a lot of coaches can't give those kids tools. And then when they get blown up, they just yell at them. Like, Well, yeah, you're asking
Block harder.
right. I mean, like, you see it all the time, like, we're not blocking anyone. Well, you asked a 285-pound guard to reach a 3 technique, and that didn't go very well. So as a coach, what's your adjustment? And if your adjustment is what you said, block harder or don't run that play, you're doing those kids a disservice. What's your adjustment if you're going to ask that and he can't do it? Do you have the ability in your scheme to make that adjustment? And so those are the hard questions you need to be asking now. I tell our kids and our coaches, we spend all week going over worst case scenario, and then we hope we never have to use it in the game. Like, we spent all week going over worst case scenario, and then a lot of times this year we won 10 games, we won 7 of them by 20 points or more. So we didn't have to use any of them. So we almost feel like you wasted some time there, the adjustments. But in the 2 or 3 games that were really close, we needed all those adjustments. And so
Right.
that's what your job is as a coach, is in the running game, building in not just play action and RPO. Because honestly, you're going to need to make sure you can get 4 yards running your base without having to trick people. And I think that comes back down to how you adjust, get numbers right, formations, all that kind of stuff. So I know there's a little bit of theory there, but I think a lot of times as coaches, that's the kind of stuff that's going to win you games. And I don't care if you want to throw the ball 60 times a game, there's going to be a time where you've got to get a yard. And what are you going to do in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, being on schedule is what, 2nd and 6 and then 3rd and 3, right? That's on schedule. Having to throw it every time on 3rd and 3 to get the first down is going to get old, and people are going to figure you out, right? Needing that ability to just go out and dominate for 3 yards that's perfect. Like, that's football to me. Like, that's what you're supposed to be able to do. When I think about building a ground game for success, you started on it and you said the offensive line, and I think that's exactly where you have to be. Your best coach should be your offensive line coach. And if you don't have a best coach, or you don't have a great offensive line coach, finding a way to develop that guy is going to pay dividends down the road when he's developing your 5 to 7 dudes up front, and now they're helping you win football games, right? Because that breeds success. And then you add to, and now maybe you do have a guard who can reach a 3 tech every play, right? I think that is where people overlook the most. I have seen it on a couple teams now, to where it's just the guy who always has been the O-line coach, regardless of if he's good or not. He's the O-line guy, and that's just how it's going to be. I think that even if that's what this position you're stuck in, right? There's guys that are stuck in positions. Coach Collins last year was stuck in the position of the guys on the staff is who he had. He couldn't go out and hire anybody else. Nobody was coming to Stillwell, right? So you couldn't go out and hire a big name offensive line coach. So just having that ability to develop them, send them off, let them get better at what they do, I think that has to be the step. So yes, X's and O's, we can be better. Like you said, coach, you can get the numbers right. You can learn how to move and trade and shift and so run some quarterback stuff. But the theory is part of the rushing attack, right? The culture is part of the rushing attack to make sure that things stay successful. So I don't think you're far off from saying, hey, you got to put a mindset in your guys. If this play is called, if the game is on the line and we have to have these amount of yards, this is the play we're running. This is the kid who's carrying it, and this is the guy who's pulling to lead up in the hole because I know he can get it done. So that to me is much X's and O's and fundamentals as anything else. All right, last part here, Coach. We'll jump into our what not to do as a coach. So what is our lesson today?
Yeah, and this is a very common one. Probably could say this to everybody, including myself, because it's something we all do. And we talk about not doing it, and then we do it anyway. So maybe I need to listen to my own lesson here. But today's lesson and what not to do as a coach is get too far ahead of yourself offensively. I do think you need, as an offensive coordinator, to have the end in mind. But a lot of time we start with the end in mind and we don't go back to the basics. So we suck at down blocking or pass pro or whatever your end in mind needs to look like. You spend so much time on getting the scheme in and the adjustments in and whatever in that you kind of neglect basic skills like ball protecting the football at running back, down blocking on the O-line, or pass pro, whatever their main skill is you need them to have, or catching a ball or running good routes. We spend so much time on the scheme, and I think there is value in that for sure. I think you need to start with scheme in mind because the skills need to match the scheme. But a lot of time we spend a whole lot of time on all the extras, all the wrinkles, all of this, all of that, and we're not very good at the base. And I'm not even just talking about base play. I'm talking about base skills to succeed in football. You get the best scheme in the world, but if you don't protect the football, if you don't understand how to block, if you don't understand how to catch or run good routes, then the scheme means zero because the defense will eventually figure that out.
Yep. Awesome, Coach. Well, I appreciate it. We'll go ahead and close out here. Social media wise, you can find me on Twitter, X, and Instagram at Coach Chambo OK. That's just the letters OK, not the word. You can also email me at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. Coach Simpson, where can we find you?
All things FB Coach Simpson. So FB Coach Simpson at Gmail is my email address. FB Coach Simpson on Twitter. I also have fbcoachsimpson.com. That's got basically everything that I've produced. Got a couple other websites we mentioned in the kind of in the advertisements. Offensivecoordinator.com, defensivecoordinator.com. Got a new one coming up. TheHeadCoachAcademy.com will be up very, very soon. Very excited about that. And of course, just showed it earlier. If you're watching this, Coach's Cap, CoachesCap.com, coachescap.com. If you want to order one of the hats, excited about that. I think hopefully if it can protect a coach and maybe get you not yelled at for forgetting your whistle, then it did its job. I basically priced the hats at what you'd pay for a normal boonie. Of course, we're throwing in a Fox 40 whistle attached and everything else with it. Really excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited about the accessory ability of the hat. I'm already thinking the next one, Coach, you got to get a pin holder, right? It's got to turn into a tactical vest, but on your head. So when you start looking for the add-ons, that's where you make it. All right, Coach, I appreciate it, man. The podcast is at Coaching 101 Pod on Twitter and X. We want to thank you for being a listener to the Coaching 101 podcast. We hope you join us next week as we continue to make the complex more simple. Please consider subscribing to the show so you'll always know when the new episodes are out. Hopefully we run into you guys at AFCA convention. That's where Coach and I will be there. I think Joe Daniels is going to join us for Saturday and Sunday. And I'm leaving Tuesday. So if you've got time, if you're around, you're in the building right now, listen to this, come find us, hunt us down. We'll record an episode with pretty much anybody, right? You come over and I should have the camera set up somewhere and we'll have the mics out and we'll be getting after it. So, come find us there at the convention. We'll be there at least until Tuesday. I don't know what day Coach Simpson's getting out of there, but we'll leave you with this. It's hard to beat someone who never gives up. No matter the situation, find a way.